Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your award-winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast and return for yet another one of our summer transfer window updates on Last Word on Spurs. And we're joined by legendary status here on Last Word on Spurs. Everyone knows the man on our screens. You see him 5 days a week, pretty much 5 days a week. Although I know, again, with Sky Sports and the running coverage on there, it's different faces every day and there's some wonderful faces on there. But this man is top of the pops. I don't mind me saying it. He is incredible. Joining me alongside these shows, I've got the wonderful Matty Hayes. Matt, love to be back alongside me. Beaming a smile. How are you?
I'm absolutely fantastic. The window's starting to hot up, not just for Spurs, but for the Premier League and European clubs as well. So it's getting very, very exciting. And as always, it's fantastic to have a brilliant guest on to help us work through the madness that we're hearing. Absolutely.
Look, with the window starting to hot up, we can only go to one man and one man only. And that is in our opinion, one of the best broadcasters, journalists, presenters out that we love on Sky Sports News. He's a household name, I've got to say, for a lot of us that tune into the transfer window. He's the one and only Dharmesh Sheth, returning to Last Word on Spurs. Dharmesh, lovely to have you join us.
Thanks, mate. Wow. What an intro.
You got to hire me for that alone, right? Sky got to get me in to get you that intro when we come on deadline day.
You're in. You're in already. Thank you very much. Good to be back.
Oh, mate. Pleasure is all ours. Dharmesh, how's your summer been so far?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Got away on a golf holiday. You're probably not wanting to know about that, but since then,
no. A lot of people think you live at Sky Sports News. A lot of people think you just stay.
I feel like I do,
and you don't come away.
I do. I feel like I do, especially
you escaped on the golf course.
Well, no, the feeling is that I only turn up in January, July, and August, and I'm just going to hibernation. That's not the case. I do that's just part of the thing I do during those months, which is transfers. But no, it's like Matt was saying there, it is starting to heat up now. We had a bit of a crazy week last week, actually, just with it was almost like an unofficial first deadline day, June the 30th, with a number of clubs, while they won't admit they were sailing close to the wind with a breaching PSR, just judging by the number of deals that got done, by deduction, you could almost say, well, actually, maybe they were sailing close to breaching PSR. But as far as we know now, every club is quite confident that they won't be in breach of it. So it's kind of like it's a reboot now with this transfer window. Like from July the 1st, it kicks off again almost, because that was like almost a soft deadline in itself for the end of that financial year.
I've got to ask you, Dharmesh, was it been like this summer for you? Because obviously you had the Euros that are on the background. Has that made the window a bit more quieter than what you would expect it to be at this stage? What's your feeling because of the Euros going on in the background and the window starting simultaneously? Has that slowed things down, do you think, for a lot of clubs at the moment?
On one hand, yes, but because of this, because of the PSR and clubs needing to do business, there was I think last time I heard, there was about £200 million spent before June the 30th once the window had opened. So you're talking about a little over 2 weeks, and that much money was spent between Premier League clubs and European clubs, and some of the clubs doing business between each other. You'll notice there were a few clubs that were doing business, but some of them were selling and buying to each other. So it was a really interesting couple of weeks, and we expected that, actually, because from the outset, we thought that it was going to be really busy in the first 2 weeks of the window. There may be a slight little lull now, but I think that you can say, with the Euros and stuff like that. But even then, it's still heating up. It's got busier the longer this window's been open. So I'm expecting it to be really busy for the next couple of months anyway.
And that's Spurs as well, right? Plenty of business going on there, Dharmesh, right?
There should be. Yeah.
There you go.
No promises. Yeah.
I feel like it's the only club you have to say no promises, Tottenham. Do you know any other club? Or was it just Tottenham, no promises? You can't make promises.
Say with everyone.
Listen,
just cover yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an absolute pleasure to have Dharmesh Sheth join us here. Thank you so much for your support. Already over 1,000 plus of you watching us live. Again, can't thank you enough for all your genuine support here on Last Word on Spurs. These shows always seem to go down ever so well. And it gives me my pleasure to turn to Matty Hayes to start us off on this Last Word on Spurs. Matt, I'll hand over to you.
It feels like a very new thing at Spurs where we're actually talking about business being done this early in the summer. It's 2 years in a row now where we've got to do it. But Dharmesh, it's fair to say with the dealings that Spurs have done in the last 12, 18, 24 months that they're very much planning for the future. And Archie Gray became the latest addition for the 24-25 season and beyond on Tuesday. after completing his move from Leeds United. The 18-year-old cost Spurs between 25 and 30 million, plus Joe Rodon heading in the opposite direction in a package worth around 40 million, which not only met the threshold for a clause within Gray's contract after Leeds failed to get out of the Championship last season, but also made him the most expensive 18-year-old in Premier League history. He joins Lucas Bergvall, another young midfielder, and Timo Werner in bolstering Postecoglou's squad ahead of the new campaign. What have you made of the business that Tottenham have done in these first few weeks of the window?
Firstly, we should say, I mean, I alluded to it before about PSR, and first things first, Tottenham were never in danger of sailing close to the wind, if you like, with breaching profit and sustainability rules. So they knew they were in a good place going into this transfer window. And the way I describe the way the window started for Tottenham is it's been an exciting start, because the three players that you've mentioned there, Timo Werner, of course, who came in on loan last season. There's another loan for Timo Werner this time around. And by and large, you know, most of the accounts that I've heard have said that he was a pretty successful loan signing for Tottenham last season. And it'll only help him being at Tottenham for a little while moving forward when he's back for next season. And the other two signings are very, very exciting. I mean, a lot of people will be forgiven for forgetting the Lucas Bergvall one that happened effectively at the end of the last transfer window in February, but then we knew he was officially going to become a Tottenham player on July the 1st. So that looks a really exciting signing. And the Archie Gray one, that is a bit of opportunism as well from Tottenham, if you like, because they would have had a keen eye on what was happening in that playoff final, because I don't think that deal potentially would have happened had Leeds United made it through that playoff final and beat Southampton and made it into the Premier League. Instead, you know, sliding doors moments like that, Leeds lose that final to Southampton. They stay in the Championship. They do have to sell players because of a situation they find themselves in. And Tottenham Hotspur now got one of who Leeds probably thought was a key to their future, but it could be now a key to Tottenham's future. It looks like a really exciting signing. So overall, I would say a really exciting start for Tottenham and reasons to be optimistic if you're a Tottenham fan.
Dharmesh, I want to turn to Spurs' transfer department, if you want to call it recruitment department, which we understand has been revamped really over the last 12 months or so. It's now led by technical director Johan Lange, and we understand there's a much stronger emphasis on the use of data to identify targets, and there has been also around the scouting of young players who are ready to make an instant impact into the first team, but still have that room for growth. Now, interestingly, Gray's arrival continues that trend that started in the winter window with signs of the likes of Radu Dragusin and Lucas Bergvall. That a lot of the hard work that reportedly went into the signing of Gray was down to Johan Lange's hard work behind the scenes, who reportedly kept in daily contact with Gray's camp and pursued that move for Spurs, with Daniel Levy joining in those final hours to get that deal over the line. I want to ask you, Dom, from your perspective and from what you see, look, you're in and around football all the time and in and around different football clubs, just how much has changed behind the recruitment scenes at Spurs in the last 12 to 18 months? Because I feel a lot of fans maybe feel now from the outside looking in that there's a lot more alignment there than there has been for a long time when it comes to the way Spurs have done their business, both in terms of incomings and outgoings. I
would totally agree that there seems to be a real alignment, a real unity, if you like, amongst what it is above Ange Postecoglou, if you like, but everyone is working and reading off the same page, if you like, because it really does feel like that there's no panic when it comes to recruitment, be it players coming in or players departing. And they're very targeted as well, it seems, which is quite an important word, I think, when it comes to transfers, not only for Tottenham, but for every club who want to go into a transfer window. They don't want to get drawn into like these long drawn out sagas that carry on for an entire summer. They have targets, and the signings that you've mentioned that they've made already would suggest a great deal of scouting and recruitment going on in behind the scenes. These are not players that are jumping off the page and you think, you know, household name here, household name there, even though people will know who these players are. But it appears that they are really doing their due diligence on profiles, on data, on age, and with a nod to the future. So on the one hand, I would say completely aligned, no panic. It is also an approach, though, for Tottenham fans in particular, that would require patience, because you're going to be buying players that aren't the finished article, but who fans and, the coaching staff and the experienced players that are there will know that there's a ceiling that is really, really high for these players to reach. So that's the kind of approach that they're going for. And it kind of aligns to whenever you hear Ange Postecoglou in a news conference, because he's never really talking about the immediate future with Tottenham. He's always talking about progress. That's his big word, progress. It doesn't matter where they finish. He wants to see progress. Now, if they are bringing in players of this ilk, of this age, of this profile, it's a nod towards the long-term future of Tottenham. They don't just want to say, we need to win a trophy. Now, I know that's the stick that, Tottenham fans get beat with. When are you going to win a trophy? I don't think that there's that obsession, if you like, within the club, just to simply say we need to win that trophy to satisfy the fans craving for a trophy because everyone else is taking the mick because Tottenham haven't won a trophy. I don't think that's the mentality anymore. There is a mentality there that is, this club is a massive club. Everything is in place. They've got an amazing stadium. They've got an amazing training ground. And now they're building a squad, it seems, whereby they're looking long way into the future, as opposed to just trying to get a short-term fix and maybe just get one trophy to satisfy a short-term urge, if you like. So I think there has to be patience. Of course there does. But I've said it before, reasons to be optimistic, I think.
I think the word Ange Postecoglou used on that front a lot last season was sustainability. I know we hear that a lot in a financial sense in football, but in terms of the squad he's building and the competitive nature of that, he doesn't want to just win a trophy for the sake of it. He wants to win a trophy so that next season you can add to that. And I think that is really refreshing to hear from a manager. And looking on that first season that he had at Tottenham, Dharmesh, despite losing Harry Kane on the eve of the season, he then battled through an injury and suspension list that really took off on that dreadful night at home to Chelsea. And then we also had the international absences due to the Asian Cup and the African Cup of Nations in January. And that list of absences for Tottenham was often in the double figures throughout the campaign. Yet they ended up fifth in Postecoglou's tenure and not very far off Aston Villa and fourth. And it was a season, of course, that brought highs and lows. But how would you reflect on last season under Ange Postecoglou, and what in your mind would be progression looking ahead to next season in his tenure?
I mean, I'd use that word, first of all. There has been progression. And that was the key word that you'd hear Ange Postecoglou saying every week, in particular to questions about Champions League. There was this obsession about asking Ange Postecoglou about Champions League, to the point where you had to ask it in a different way. I remember I went to one news conference when the previous weeks he continued being asked about it, and he was almost dismissing it, not because he didn't think Tottenham could get Champions League, but because he didn't want to get obsessed by the Champions League as all right, we've achieved something then. His sense of achievement is whether he sees progress within the club, within the players that he's brought in. Now, it didn't happen for Tottenham last season with regard to Champions League, but if someone had said to the majority of Tottenham fans that after all of those setbacks that Tottenham had, including the departure of Harry Kane, and someone had said that you're going to finish fifth in the Premier League, I don't think anyone would have placed Tottenham in fifth place in the Premier League. So in that way, you can say that Tottenham have made progress. Yes, people will say, well, they were in the driving seat at one point for Champions League and they didn't get it. So could that be looked at as a failure? I think you need to take a step back and look at it overall and see what happened last season. In fact, if you were to flip around the results from last season, so Tottenham finished the season as they started and started the season as they finished, we'd be having a different conversation here, I think, because they would have ended up in the same position, but the narrative around Tottenham would have been a lot different. Whereas I think Ange Postecoglou is looking at it, taking a step back and saying, overall, there has been progress. We're not just talking about where they finished, because they finished higher than they had done the previous season, not purely on that, but what he's seen within the club, off the pitch and on the pitch as well. And going back to your previous question, when you look at what the structure is like now at Tottenham, it feels like there is a stability there that is going to enable Tottenham to move forward, particularly with these kind of signings that they're making.
Thomas, I want to ask you one question, actually, just in regards to how you found Ange in those press conferences. Because, again, I think it's fair to say that what it appears from the outside looking in is that when you go to these pressers, that, as you've said, he gets maybe fairly touchy over a couple of subjects, and he seems like he doesn't want the same question being asked twice. He's very much on the ball in terms of what's being asked. How have you made of him as a manager to speak to in comparison to some of the other managers in their first season in the Premier League? What have you made of him as a character?
I only went to a couple of news conferences actually with Ange Postecoglou, but I was always on edge before I went because I always had to make sure that every single word of my question couldn't be misconstrued, because I've seen so many of his news conferences where, where, hold on, why are you implying that? Why are you implying this? Are you implying that? So you have to be very clear. Now, I noticed the change as well, because at the start when Ange came in to Tottenham, I think there was this, he was like really like fantastic with him. He was fantastic with the media throughout the season, make no mistake about it. But particularly at the start, I think a lot of the questions he was being asked were quite sort of lifestyle-y, if you like. There were footballing questions, but there were lifestyle questions as well.
Very
and
much.
I think everyone got to the point where every week they wanted to ask something to get something different out of him, which is refreshing and which is great. And that's why we loved all of his news conferences. But then there came a point when I think it just got to the point where he was probably thinking, I'm a football manager. You know, we don't need to continue talking about and trying to get a line out of me about if I enjoy, you know,
happy days
or whatever. And that might have been the turning point for Ange Postecoglou. And then from that moment on, I wouldn't say he got prickly at all. I just thought he was more, what the word I'm looking for is demanding, if you like, of what he was being asked. And he wasn't going to suffer fools at all. So that's why whenever I went, I was, right, just make sure that what I'm going to ask him is to the point, and it can't be taken in any other way apart from the way that I'm asking it.
Yeah, I think, John, Matt, bringing you in there, I think that's a true reflection. Those first, as we know, those first 10 games of the season, you know, the highs that we felt going to that stadium, and obviously the results that we achieved and being top of the league in the way we did start. I know there's that running joke that Spurs won the league in October. Like Dharmesh said there, I think there was that feeling in those first 10 where, and what every team to touch was like gold dust, couldn't go wrong. And a lot of the pressers did have some great lines come out of them. But it did feel like, Matt, from those 10 games, the pressers got more serious when the results started to deteriorate. Is that fair, Matt?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a moment that stands out when Dharmesh mentions that kind of switch in Ange Postecoglou. There's a journalist, I think there was one week where he'd spoken about a movie or a book that he enjoyed, and the next week a journalist brought up a similar question, and Ange went, said something like, "Are you still in last week?" or that was something along those lines, where you could see he was kind of trying to steer that boat towards something more serious. But yeah, I think that there's a correlation there between the results kind of falling away and him becoming a little bit more serious. And I don't know if that was maybe a style of coaching from him, that he wanted to show that he was fully focused on what was happening on the pitch, to maybe put the players in similar, you know, no coaching experience, so I haven't got a clue, but maybe that's something in there. But I completely agree as well with the point that Dharmesh made about if the season was flipped. And I think over those match reviews towards the end of the season, Ricky, I kind of described it a bit as recency bias, that the last 2 months, the results have been terrible, and people are forgetting what came before that, and you need to balance out the season as a whole. And the way Dharmesh put it, I thought was perfect, because if there was that maybe the opposite trajectory in the way the season went, it would be much easier to look back at it in a positive light. But the be all and end all is we did better last season than we did the season before in so many different ways. So yeah, there's only positives to take from it for me.
And I think the further away you get from last season, the more you take more of an overview of what actually happened. And then you can take the fact that, well, it was fifth, so it was progress. Look at the players we're signing. That is progress. So when you're in it, and especially with, this might not have happened like 20 years ago when you didn't have social media, because it's not only after every game, it's after every incident in a game.
Absolutely.
Bang, something's happening. So it can sometimes require just a step back and just to say, actually, do you know what? He is right. He's seen enough to suggest that there is progress. He's seen enough to suggest that the future does look bright, and he's seen enough to think, yes, a fifth place finish, while yes, they could have been in the Champions League, it didn't happen. But compared to the season before and everything that happened in the last summer, you'd have taken it.
No, I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. And I think what I will just say is, I know Andrew's come across very well on TV coverage during the Euros. I think, again, many of them did and warmed to him as a character. And I think, again, that's why there was that battle between ITV and BBC for his services, because he has come across really well in terms of the coverage on there. Right. Dharmesh, keen to ask you, look, we know Spurs are understood still to be prioritising attacking their midfield signings during this transfer window, but they're also, as an understanding that Spurs are looking maybe to add to their defence, depending on what happens during this window. We've already seen a particularly stream of players heading out the exit door so far. Be keen to know from you, what do you understand to be, at the moment, the main targets for Spurs in terms of incomings this summer?
You're right. I think the focus and priority is on the attacking side of the pitch. A versatile forward is the phrase that I was given earlier on today as to what would be the priority signing for Tottenham. So maybe someone that can play alongside, all the way along the front three in every single position. With regard to the defensive side, I mean, you're right to say, I mean, I was running through these names earlier and I couldn't believe how many players had actually left. Eric Dyer, Joe Rodon, Japhet Tanganga, Ivan Perisic, Ryan Sessegnon, Ndombele's gone now, I think, as well. But on the flip side, you've got Van der Ven and Romero as your first choice centre-backs. Dragusin has come in very, very recently. You've got Ashley Phillips as the really young central defender who will be learning from those experienced ones that are ahead of him. Ben Davis can play in central defence as well as on the left side. And Dorrington as well, another young player coming through the ranks who can play in there. So with all of those players, the information I have as it stands, of course, this can change because we're still very early in the window. Centre-back doesn't seem to be a pressing priority for Tottenham in this transfer window. I was asking about fullbacks because I thought, yeah, potentially, they could bring in a fullback, but that probably will depend on departures as well. Even though there've been a number of departures in this transfer window, it could depend on Emerson Royal and whatever happens with him. If Emerson Royal was to leave, I think Tottenham would go into the market for a fullback. That's not to say they're not doing their due diligence already. It's not going to be a case of, oh my goodness, it's a surprise Emerson Royal's left, let's bring someone in. That recruitment team, who we've been eulogizing about, will be doing due diligence on every single position that they believe that needs strengthening, or even a marginal gain in any single position they will be looking at, because that is effectively their job. So when it comes to one in, one out, when you're looking at Emerson Royal, I think that would be key about whether Tottenham would go back into the market. And I know there's talk of Kyle Walker-Peters potentially making a return, and a number of other fullbacks that Tottenham have been linked with. But I think first things first, they want to see if the Emerson Royal departure and potential departure does come to fruition or not.
We do want to go into that Emerson one in a little bit more detail, but before we get there, I want to speak about another couple of potential departures from Tottenham's fullback rankings, because we conceded 61 goals in the Premier League last season, which is too much. There was 32 from open play, 14 from set pieces, and actually heading into last season, there was only 2 instances in Premier League history where a team had scored and conceded more than 60 goals, and they were both Tottenham in 07-08 and 22-23, and then we went and did it again under Ange Postecoglou. But the overhaul of that
You're in a fun mood tonight, aren't you?
I just got stats. What can I say?
Dharmesh, we're Spurs fans, all right?
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, that overhaul of the defence has already started with the signings of Van de Ven and Dragusin. But regarding some outgoings, West Ham and Juventus are reportedly interested in Sergio Reguilon, and Genoa in negotiations with Tottenham over Jed Spence to make that loan deal permanent. While there may be some issues there, Spence could be offered to some other clubs. Can you see Reguilon and Spence heading out fairly soon?
I mean, I see them heading out in this transfer window fairly soon. Will all depend on what kind of offers they're going to get. Yes, Tottenham are listening to offers for these 2 players. It's clear that neither of them are part of Ange Postecoglou's and Tottenham's long-term plan. So they will want to cash in this summer's transfer window, but they're not going to give them away. So they've got to make sure that they get the right price for these players. Now, they've tried the loan market with both of these players, which is usually a wise thing to do, because if you can send a player out on loan and when they return, they've still got time on their contract. If they performed well on those loan spells, then there's a chance that the value can go up. Sergio Reguilon was a case in point. I mean, from what I saw when he came in and played at Manchester United and he played at Brentford, I don't think he did his value too much harm at all. Jed Spence is another issue because it's clear on the flip side that every club will know that Tottenham do want these two players out of the club. And so when you have that situation, a buying club is always going to try and go lower than perhaps what Tottenham would value those players at. That's just simple how it would work with demand and supply when it comes to a transfer of this type. So with these two, I would expect them both to leave before August the 30th. How quickly, that is a different question altogether, because they will want to get the right kind of money in for them. They won't want to give them away.
Yeah. Dharmesh, I think with us as fans, you can tell that we are still quite caught up with last season about the amount of goals we conceded. I know we joked there about it. I think the thing with Tottenham is that, it's mad, Doms. We looked at, again, last season. I think many would argue that Spurs have got arguably their probably best defence they've had in a number of years in terms of individuals. You look at the likes of Pedro Porro, how much he's improved, the likes of Van der Ven, Romero, of course, and you look at the way Spurs have essentially, Destiny Udogie in his first season, shone as individuals. I think that's why there's been an element of concern that how are we conceding so many goals where individually we've got such brilliant defenders, we are so tactically astute, and yet we've conceded all these goals, which I think it tells you, you've seen it, Darms, in the past with players. You could have the array of best players that you've got, but sometimes as a team, for whatever reason, they just can't always function, right?
Yeah, but you've got to also look at it. This is the first season that all four have played together.
Absolutely.
So that's one, and they're going to have another pre-season under their belts this summer.
Yep.
And you'd expect them to be better next season, particularly with other signings that will enable Ange Postecoglou to play even more regularly how he wants to play. We all remember that. I mean, you'll remember that game against Chelsea. I mean, what an incredible game that was.
We're still getting therapy for it.
Yeah, but there was there was a standing ovation, if I remember correctly, after the game, because they stuck to their principle. So Ange Postecoglou will stick to what he knows, and this is the way Tottenham are going to play. He's always maintained that. So now it's up to the players to adapt to this way of playing. Now, that will happen in two ways. One, the more you play together, the better you're going to get at it. And then two, bringing in the players that are going to be able to play in this style and in this system. So I would expect Tottenham's defense to be even better next season than it was last season, simply because they will know each other a lot better. And the players that they'll start to bring in on a more regular basis will be Ange Postecoglou's team then. And he will know, this player knows exactly how I want to play. I can play him here. And then it should, in theory, be a title-winning season for Tottenham then.
I love that. Do you know what? I can't believe those words have left Dharmesh's mouth. A title-winning season for Tottenham. It only happens on Last Word On Spurs, doesn't it, Doms? It may do. Listen, what we are going to go for our first break of the show for our listeners and audio. We've got over 3,000 of you plus that are watching us either on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube. Again, we can't thank you enough for all your support for the show. I'm joined by my co-host, the wonderful Matty Hayes. He's back alongside me as usual for these transfer specials. And I'm joined by broadcaster, journalist, presenter. He is the one and only Dharmesh Sheth from Sky Sports. Sky Sports' very, very own. That man we tune into and we hold on every word he says when that window is open in January in the summer. It's where we turn to. Dharmesh, we love having you on. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to hand back to wonderful Matty Hayes to kickstart second part of Last Word On Spurs. Matty, over to you.
Yeah, Dharmesh, you spoke earlier about the future of Emerson Royal, and AC Milan are reportedly the team who are closest to getting something done for him. Royal appeared in 24 matches in Postecoglou's first season in charge of Tottenham and showed his versatility, starting in centre-back, right-back, and even some games in left-back as he had done in the past. But naturally, he doesn't seem to be a fit for Ange Postecoglou's system as a fullback. How quickly do you think we could see Emerson Royal off the books this summer?
Again, the speed of a potential deal will depend on what AC Milan do, because the information I have as of in the last few hours is that there has not been official contact between the clubs. So there's not been an official contact between AC Milan and Tottenham over Emerson Royal. Yes, there definitely is an interest. And yes, we understand that Emerson Royal would welcome a move to AC Milan. He'll be getting Champions League football. He'll be playing for one of the biggest clubs in Italy or in Europe, if you like, as well. So potentially there is a deal to be done, but the most important part of the deal hasn't even materialized yet, and that is AC Milan approaching Tottenham about a potential deal for Emerson Royal. So until that happens, he's a Tottenham player, and it could take a little while. And like I said to you before, reinforcing in the defensive areas could be dependent on what happens with Emerson Royal. And so it's not 100% guaranteed, even though we do expect it to happen, that he would leave. But if AC Milan are going to follow up with their interest and formalize it, they'll have to come up with an offer that Tottenham would find acceptable, first of all, and then an offer that Emerson Royal would find acceptable as well. So still a way to go, I think, before a deal can be struck. But you know what? Once there is contact and once there are bids, things can happen pretty quickly. But as it stands, that initial contact hasn't been made as far as we know.
Just look at a few potential targets Tottenham could have if a move for Emerson does materialise. Kyle Walker-Peters, again, a name you've already mentioned, of course, a former Spurs player himself. You have Jan Couto, a brilliant season at Girona last season, 10 assists as they qualified for the Champions League, but who was ultimately on Manchester City's books. You have Vanderson at Monaco as well, and Michael Coyote, the youngster, at Fiorentina. Are any of these genuine targets for Spurs? Do we know?
Yeah, I mean, I've not got information on that specifically. The Kyle Walker-Peters one is one that won't go away, but there are a number of clubs who are interested in Kyle Walker-Peters as well. It'd be interesting to see if that one did come to fruition, because he'd be coming back to the club, wouldn't he? And I don't know what you guys think. You will have seen him when he burst onto the scene at Tottenham. Was there a sense of disappointment when they decided to say, right, you know, you're not going to get as much regular first team football as you'd like, so we're going to move you on?
I think there was always a willingness. I don't know if you agree, Matt. I think there's a willingness to see this guy get given game time. But I think from what we saw, and I don't want to be disrespectful to Carl, I just don't think he was up to the required level at that time for what Spurs had, where you thought he would genuinely challenge as a first-team player, Matt. Don't you agree on that at all?
Yeah, completely. I think when an academy player leaves, there's always going to be that kind of sense of what could have been. I remember his first game, his Premier League debut away to Newcastle, first game of the season, and we just signed Kyle Walker. We pluck Kyle Walker-Peters out of the back pocket, but the performance itself was impressive, and he did have some games at Tottenham where we kind of thought, look, this is a player who could go on and actually be important to us. But I agree with you, Ricky, that ultimately the consistency wasn't there and the quality wasn't there enough for us to keep pursuing that. But there's no denying he's gone on to become a much better player at Southampton. You just then question the level and how much his skill and performance at the top of the Championship is actually transferable to a team fighting at the top of the Premier League.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. Yeah. Dharmesh, I know you've already said to us, on this show that centre-back is not really an area that the club are fully focused on as of this moment, but we've had some tentative links to players I just want to ask you about. I mean, look, you broke earlier today the story of Max Kilman, of course, going to West Ham United. Quite a hefty fee there. We've heard, again, I think from you in the past here and other journalists associated with Sky, that there might have been interest from Spurs in the past. Just out of interest, because you broke that deal, keen to ask you about Max Kilman. Was you surprised that he's left Wolves or West Ham, and how big a coup is that for that fee that they're going to pay?
Not surprised. If you look, even before Julian Lopetegui became manager at West Ham, I think there was an interest in Max Kilman. There's been a long-standing interest. This was only reinforced because Julian Lopetegui actually managed Max Kilman at Wolves the season before last, and he was a regular under Julian Lopetegui as well. I think West Ham went in with £25 million initially, and I think they even knew it was going to get laughed out. Wolves didn't need to sell, didn't want to sell, but money talks. And if they were going to get close to like the £40 million mark, we expected an agreement to be struck. And so it's proved, and it's moved pretty quickly because he's since started his medical. It's all happened in the space of like 24 hours, this one. So it hasn't surprised me at all because of the links with Julian Lopetegui and also the long-standing interest that they had in Kilman. £40 million, some people will say, it's quite a lot of money. I think one added factor, I know this is a Tottenham podcast, but one nice sidebar to that story is Max Kilman actually joined Wolves from Maidenhead back in 2018, and he cost Wolves £40,000. Now, at the time, Maidenhead sold him to Wolves for £40,000. Not many people were even thinking about it. It was a mere drop in the ocean, that whole deal. It didn't really create many headlines. And Maidenhead at the time just said, you know what? We think he's going to be brilliant. He could even become an England international. We're going to stick in the sell-on clause in there as well. And we understand that sell-on clause to be between 15 and 20%. So on any profit that Maidenhead would make on that. So you're looking at almost £40 million profit that Wolves will have made on that signing, of which this could be life-changing money for Maidenhead, because 15 to 20% is between £6 and £8 million. I heard one person talking about this on the radio the other day, and they were saying that this could be the difference between Maidenhead being semi-professional to turning full-time professional.
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean,
what an incredible story.
Lovely little football story. 100%.
Yeah, exactly. So there have been rumours with Tottenham, not really strong ones. It was always going to be West Ham who were the ones who were really, really pushing for Kilman, and that one's done now. So, well, not done, as good as done.
Yep. No, that is absolutely fine. One other name I wanted to ask you about very quickly, because it's a name that has been in and around the summer for Spurs fans, and be interested to know, you get your take on it as to where his future may lie if it isn't Tottenham, and that is of Ricardo Calafiori, a player that I know Spurs fans looking at the Euros thinking, we'd like a bit of him. He looks like a promising player on the eye. What's that you can tell us on him, Dharmesh? Because again, you've made it very clear so far that, as you understand, centre-backs aren't a prominent area Spurs are focusing on. But what do you understand the future to be around?
Yeah, listen, when I say centre-backs is not the priority, that doesn't mean that Tottenham won't be doing their due diligence on every single area, like I mentioned before. But the way that their squad is being built at the moment, the priority doesn't appear to be that area. With regard to Calafiori, he impressed a lot of people at Euro 2024. He's still got 3 years left on his Bologna contract. He played in all 3 of Italy's group games. Played the full games for Italy in those Euro 2024, but was banned for the round of 16 game in which Italy lost to Switzerland. I'm not saying that was a reason that they lost, but he was a key player for them in that group stage. So they definitely missed him in that round of 16. The information we have at the moment is that there's a growing feeling of a strong and stronger interest from, and I don't want to say it, but you know who. So at this stage, I'm told as it stands, there hasn't been a formal approach. There's some reports in Italy are now suggesting that Arsenal have approached Bologna about a potential deal, but it is definitely a player that they are looking at. And it seems that compared to Tottenham, Arsenal's priority would be to strengthen in that area, whereas Tottenham are looking further up the pitch.
Dharmesh, appreciate it.
Even if that isn't a move that materializes for Tottenham, I think it's just another sign of how that new scouting department is working, because there was interest reported back in January from Spurs in Calafiori before he kind of went into the more mainstream outside of Italy sort of viewpoint from that Euro 2024.
It highlights the work that they're doing there.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And then it ends up with Arsenal. Come on. Looking at potential outgoings, Dharmesh, Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, as we've heard for quite a while, is reportedly keen to leave Tottenham this summer with 1 year left on his contract, and of course changing agency in the last couple of months, which I think always points towards one thing. Borussia Dortmund are reportedly pushing to sign Pascal Gross, but if that fails, Højbjerg is a player that they could look at. Where do we know, I suppose, where Højbjerg might end up this summer? Or is it just a waiting game at this point?
Yeah, a bit of a waiting game, but it's clear now that his future, he doesn't seem to have a future now at Tottenham. I think this will be the window that Tottenham will want to cash in. It's clear, as you mentioned, with the changing of an agent, that usually means one thing: get me a move, because I haven't been able to get a move up until then. There was even talk in January and last summer that he was going to be on the move. There's even talk that he might have joined Manchester United at one point, if you remember, when Manchester United were looking for a short-term fix in midfield, and Højbjerg's name was really strongly linked to Manchester United before they ended up getting, I think it was Sofian Amrabat on deadline day last summer. But then Højbjerg stayed, but wasn't a regular starter. And if you look at the signings that Tottenham are now making, the limited game time that he had last season, it's only going to be further limited if he was to stay next season. So I think they want to make some money on Højbjerg in this transfer window, because it's effectively going to be the last opportunity when they can realistically command a good fee for Højbjerg. So I won't be surprised to see him leaving, maybe to a European club. And there is interest. You mentioned Borussia Dortmund. There are a number of other clubs who have had a tentative interest at the moment. As yet, we haven't heard of any concrete formal offers for him. But as I said before, it is quite early in the window, and we are expecting offers for Højbjerg, and we are expecting him to leave Tottenham before the window closes.
Dharmesh, thank you so much for that update. Right, we're going to turn our attention to a couple of our central midfielders at Spurs at the moment. That is Yves Bissouma and Rodrigo Bentancur. Now, reports earlier in the window suggested that Spurs want to keep both players, and it would take a massive offer to tempt Spurs to sell either of the midfield pair. Dharmesh, bring us up to date. What do you understand the future to be on both of this, midfield duo Spurs have in their ranks?
Well, I mean, it's a short answer, this one. I mean, they're not actively welcoming or listening to offers. And they're not actively looking to sell these two players. But, and this is not just to do with Bissouma and Bentancur, this is just a general theme in transfers with every single club. And that is, if you can say till you're blue, not for sale, don't want to sell, until a huge offer comes in that turns your head. And if a huge offer did come in for either of these players, I'm not going to say that Tottenham will automatically sell these players, but they will sit up and take notice of the offer, because a couple of things they'll have to take into account is the timing of the offer and how much that offer is. So if it was to come early enough in the window, I think it would be more considered than if it came late in the window, because if they're going to go late into the window and assume that Bentancur and Bissouma are staying at the football club, then they'll probably take their foot off the gas with regard to any potential replacements. If a big enough offer comes early in the window and they do accept it, then they've got enough time to be able to bring in a replacement. But that's ifs and buts at the moment. As far as we're aware, Tottenham don't want to sell. They're not actively looking to sell. But as I mentioned before, money talks. If a big enough offer was to come along, they'd seriously consider it.
Looking a little bit further up the pitch, Tottenham are reportedly weighing up an improved bid for Aston Villa's Jacob Ramsey after having an offer of £20 million plus Giovanni Lo Celso rejected. There's reportedly a growing feeling that Ramsey could be prized away from Aston Villa by a bid of up to £50 million. Any Tottenham move for Jacob Ramsey is likely to be contingent on Aston Villa accepting Lo Celso in as part of the deal, which is definitely helped by his history with Unai Emery. Do you know anything, Dharmesh, about this potential part exchange deal?
I was speaking to someone about this earlier on because it kind of went quiet when the deal wasn't materializing, but I'm told that it's not off the table just yet as far as Tottenham are concerned. They are still interested in Jacob Ramsey. And if you look at, you talk about the technical director at Tottenham in Langer. He was the sporting director, of course, at Aston Villa, so he knows all about Jacob Ramsey. He'll know his profile and obviously feels that he would fit in what Tottenham Hotspur are trying to do. Giovanni Lo Celso entering the final year of his contract now. This will be the final time where, like Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, they'll be able to command a transfer fee for someone like Lo Celso, but they'd love it to be part of a deal where they could bring Jacob Ramsey in the other way. So I think what would have to happen is that Tottenham, if they wanted to get Jacob Ramsey, because he's going to cost more than Lo Celso, simply because of what he's done in the Premier League, number one, his ceiling, number two, and also the contract situations of both players. So if Tottenham went back in and said Giovanni Lo Celso plus an extra bit of money, who knows, Villa's head could be turned, because what Tottenham can be playing on is what you mentioned before, is the Lo Celso factor. Maybe doesn't fit into what Tottenham want to do in the long term. Even though whenever I saw him play, I don't know what you guys thought, he always seemed to do quite a good job, particularly last season whenever he came on. But it's clear that he's not really part of the longer term plans at Tottenham. We haven't heard of any ongoing talks over a new contract. So it looks like it's going to be this summer or not at all. So I think they might play on the fact that this relationship with Unai Emery, because he obviously plays the best football when he was playing under Unai Emery. Yep. Maybe if they can be reunited, Tottenham can use that and use that as their bargaining tool to bring Jacob Ramsey to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium.
Dharmesh, another name that still continues not to go away this summer, despite the fact that Spurs adding to their midfield ranks, is that of Conor Gallagher. And I think it's a name that I think many were expected to be linked with Spurs in the opening few weeks of the window due to the situation around Chelsea with PSR and, of course, their need to maybe sell a homegrown talent. But it does feel maybe Spurs have moved on from the player, although we are hearing reports that Spurs still have an interest in the player. And to also just suggest that the player is reluctant to move to the Midlands. So we know there's been links there actually to Aston Villa for Conor Gallagher as well. I mean, do we know how keen the player would be on a move to Spurs, given the fact that we know he's a Chelsea boy growing up and he has a real affiliation with that club down the road, that blue club, obviously in Stamford Bridge? Where do you see Conor Gallagher's future at? Can you see him ending up at Spurs before the end of this summer transfer window?
Yeah, first of all, I would say there was, as you mentioned there was lots of talk about players potentially leaving Chelsea before June the 30th. But the information we got was that Chelsea weren't in danger of breaching profit and sustainability rules. But I mean, if you think about it, no club is going to publicly say that they're sailing close to the wind with regard to these rules, simply because if other clubs know that they are in danger of breaching these rules and they need to sell players, what is a buying club going to do? They're just going to lowball the offer. Absolutely lowball the offer. So it's not in their interest to be able to make any of that public. So all of the noises that were coming out of Chelsea, no problem. We don't need to sell. However, what they did do was sell the likes of Ian Maatsen. And Ian Maatsen to Aston Villa got them £37.5 million. So I think that would have helped if there were any worries or issues with regard to PSR, and it ease the pressure on any of the other players leaving. But we do know that players like Conor Gallagher, players like Trevor Chalobah, Armando Broja as well, would represent pure profit when it comes to the books, when it comes to selling, because they've been at the club from such a young age and didn't cost them any money or minimal money originally. There has been a long-standing interest from Tottenham. This predates Ange Postecoglou coming to the club. They have always liked this player. Now, I recall last summer there was a chance that Tottenham were going to go in on deadline day to try and take advantage of the fact that Chelsea would be making a pure profit on a player like Conor Gallagher. But then what ended up happening is he was one of the key players for Chelsea last season. When Reece James was injured for nearly the entire season, who was captain? Conor Gallagher was captain of Chelsea. So that's the flip side that would suggest Chelsea want to keep him. Conor Gallagher would want to stay. On the other side of proceedings, you've got the situation with his contract, which is not helpful for Chelsea. He's entered the final year of his contract. So whatever Chelsea want to do, publicly or privately, say they want to sell him, Conor Gallagher doesn't have to go anywhere. Conor Gallagher could just say, I will sit it out. I'm okay here, thanks. I'll wait till next summer and I'll have the pick of however many clubs there are. The downside potentially for Conor Gallagher is if they are trying to force him out, which I'm not saying they are, but if they are, and he is not shifting, is there the threat that he might not get played in that time? So he needs to think about all of that as well. He's got into the squad for Euro 2024. He's been playing for England at Euro 2024. If he isn't getting regular first team football, is that going to be the same? You know, is he going to have the same opportunity to play for England? That will be something that is in the back of his mind as well. But he holds all the cards here. Having said all of that, there is definitely an interest from Tottenham. As far as we know, no formal contact in this transfer window so far. And as far as Conor Gallagher is concerned, he is not thinking about his future at the moment. He is just going to get through Euro 2024, however long England are in that competition. And then he will assess all of his options when he returns.
A lesser known name that Tottenham are reportedly interested in for this window as well, Dharmesh, is that of Désiré Doué, the 19-year-old winger, widely regarded as one of the most exciting talents around Europe, with multiple clubs monitoring him over the last few years since he burst onto the scene with Stade Rennais. Last season, at just 18 years of age throughout the season, saw him make 31 appearances in Ligue 1. As they finished mid-table, he scored 4 and assisted 5, 76 appearances altogether at his young age. Have you heard of any interest from Tottenham in this player?
I mean, from what I've read, that there is an interest. The information that I'm getting is not forthcoming with regard to this player and whether Tottenham have made an official approach to Ren or whether it is just at an interest stage at the moment. But looking at it, if you take a step back, we know that one of the priority positions is, like I said right at the start of this, a versatile forward. And if you look at what he can do, you mentioned all of those stats. He can play on the wing. He could probably come in the center as well. Add to that his profile and his age. It seems to be something that would be perfect in what Tottenham are trying to do just now. So it doesn't surprise me that if there is an interest, Tottenham would be interested. It doesn't surprise me at all. Again, early in the window, but definitely want to watch simply because of the profile of player that he is and the fact that Tottenham are looking for a versatile forward in this window.
I think I got to say on that name, Matt, I think that's one that for the fan base that they're genuinely really, really excited upon, because again, we can see, as we touched upon the start of the show, just the young, talented squad Spurs are building. It feels like a player like that and his profile, Matt, would certainly feel the right kind of fit with regards to what Spurs are trying to do to bring some real energy, some real dynamism into that midfield, where again, they've got some rare talent in there, but it feels like with him, there's a bit of a superstar in there potentially, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just the list of teams that are interested in him this summer, I think just tells you everything you need to know about the player. And along with Lenny Yaro of Lille, he's one of two really big talents in Ligue 1 that could be looking for a big move. But I think what's most exciting about him is his skill and his ability to beat a man, which is something that's really been lacking at Tottenham for the last couple of years. And Timo Werner was brought in on loan and could do that to an extent, but just not consistently enough. And Brennan Johnson, when he did play in position, did have that strength, but he just didn't get out there often enough. And I wasn't lucky enough to see the prime of Aaron Lennon at Tottenham Hotspur, but I know people always say you could hear the clap of the seats as people stood up to hear him, to see him running down the wing. And it feels as though maybe Desiree Doué, if his trajectory continues in the way that it's going, could definitely be a player who fits that bill as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, one to keep an eye on for sure. I'm sure it'll be a name we speak about later in the summer for sure. Dharmesh, thank you for that. Look, one name that continues to not go away that I know, again, the Spurs fan base are potentially very, very excited about, depending on, of course, where his future
I thought he was in England. I thought he was in a Tottenham shirt there. Bit premature.
We're trying to... Listen, not half of the English shirt is similar to the Tottenham shirts these days. You can see we cut it from the collar, couldn't you, Dharmesh? We cut it from the collar. We're trying to tempt ourselves this is happening. We're trying to make ourselves believe.
If Eze's watching this, he's thinking, I look good in that.
He does look good in it. Keep talking about him, Dharmesh. Tell him how good he looks in it when you next see him, please. Look, he is reportedly for Spurs a leading target during this summer transfer window. There's been reports that Spurs want to accelerate their interest in terms of negotiations with Palace after the Euros, and it's understood Spurs have not been put off by that release clause, which we're led to believe, and you can maybe tell us more, it's led to believe around the 60 million mark. Look, we know Eze has got, again, the representatives at Spurs and everywhere in base. Spurs have got a number of players that have come from base, as we know, even the manager, and Postecoglou, is part of that agency. So it does feel from the outside looking in that everything feels this deal could be done, but at the same time, with a release clause, there's no guarantee to that. Because I think we've seen in the past, Dharmesh, you've commented on and been a part of a lot of transfers and seen a lot on Sky Sports where even with release clauses, they're not the most easiest to actually release, pardon the pun by saying that. Because we've seen in the past, the likes of Suarez, I remember that deal, Arsenal, they got in when they I think they put over £1 of the release clause, didn't end up materialising to get the player. So just because they have a release clause doesn't mean it's a maybe easy deal to do, but from the outside looking in on this one, I suppose the biggest question to ask you, do you know if there's any genuine interest from Spurs in the player?
Well, what I would say about release clause generally, it is pretty straightforward, because if you meet the release clause, you don't need to talk to the club. You can just go and talk to the player. It's then up to the player whether he wants to talk to the club. Sometimes you'll have a transfer where there's no release clause, but clubs will bid for a player because they're getting an indication or a noise or some sort of like encouragement from somewhere that the player would be open to the move, because it wouldn't be worth them blindly bidding otherwise. Whereas it works in reverse with the release clause, because effectively you've got to go and meet the release clause, and then that gives you the opportunity to speak to the player. Then it is up to the player and the representatives whether they want to speak to the club. Now, that can be nipped in the bud very, very quickly after a release clause is triggered, because if it's triggered, do you want to speak to them? Yes, right, go and speak to them. No, right, don't. That's over. Nothing further to say. Whereas sometimes when there is a release clause, a club will need to speak to the club that owns the player if they want to negotiate on the release clause. Now, this doesn't always necessarily mean that they want to pay below the release clause, because clubs are going to be very, very reluctant to do that because they put the release clause in there for a reason. But sometimes the buying club might say, we'll pay you more than the release clause. And everyone says, why are you paying more than the release clause in exchange for favorable payment terms? So, for example, sometimes these release clauses might require a club to say, right, you need to pay the whatever it is, £80 million straight up or in 2 installments of 40 million. Whereas the club could say, well, actually, we might pay you £10 million more, but can we reduce the yearly payments by 10 million maybe? And then that is more favorable to the buying club, and the selling club get more money across the piece. So sometimes that can happen. With regard to this, I've tried to find out 100% whether there is a release clause in Eze's contract. I made a call today. The information was not forthcoming. However, the information that I have got is, yes, there has been interest from Tottenham, and it's been a long-standing interest, as we know. We've talked about Eberechi Eze before, but I'm told also that it is not down the line with anyone. So it appears at the moment it's still a pretty open race. But no smoke without fire. There seems to be a lot of traction when you're talking about Eze and Tottenham. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Crystal Palace do not want to sell. They've already lost or on the verge of losing Michael Olise. You know, I look at there's 4 like gems. I know there are a lot of good players at Palace, but the 4 gems you'd be looking at going into the summer, you're looking at Olise, Eze, Wharton, who's only just joined and like been unbelievable, and Mark Gay as well.
Yeah.
Palace, in an ideal scenario, would probably, if they're being honest with themselves, probably thinking Olise was probably the one they were most vulnerable with, because a lot of people were very well aware of this release clause, which effectively has got triggered by Bayern Munich, but they probably want to keep the rest of them for at least 1 more season. Whether that's going to happen, we'll have to wait and see, particularly because the likes of Gay, Eze and Wharton have now tasted a major international tournament with England, and they will want to be continued to play at the highest level. Crystal Palace, even though they're on the up and they're like playing fantastic football, and the is very optimistic signs about what's happening there, it's a short career as well, and they want Champions League football maybe, or they want European football maybe as quickly as they can. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. Palace definitely do not want to see him go, but money talks. And if it is a release clause, or if there's not a release clause and there's a massive offer, it is something that they're going to have to consider.
Dharmesh, thank you so much. What we are going to quickly do, we are going to quickly fit in our final break of the show for our listeners on audio. When we come back, the wonderful Matty Hayes is going to be taking you through where Spurs are in that forward area of where we are looking to hopefully do a bit of business. Like I say, thank you so much for joining us. We've got nearly over 4,500 of you watching us live on YouTube, on X, on Instagram, on Facebook. Get involved. Come and drop us your opinions, your comments. Who do you want to see Spurs sign this summer? Come and let us know. We're joined by the wonderful Matty Hayes, my co-host for these shows. He's love doing these along with Matt. And again, joining us, it is broadcasting, it is journalist, it is presenter royalty in the wonderful Dharmesh Sheth from Sky Sports. Yes, that man you see on Sky Sports News, he's back on Last Word On Spurs, and we love him for it. Dharmesh, thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to the wonderful Matty Hayes to close on where we are in this forward area of Tottenham.
And Richarlison is the only place to start. On social media, he's rubbished rumours, Dharmesh, that he was in part of a player plus cash deal in an offer to sign Newcastle's Swedish star Alexander Isak this summer. Having arrived in North London 2 summers ago for £60 million, his 12 goals in 31 matches for Tottenham last season impressed amid an unfortunate streak of injuries, which hampered his involvement for quite a while. And we've already spoken about that famous game against Chelsea. It was actually after that where Richarlison took the decision to have surgery on one of his injuries, and he came back and scored 10 and 10. But that injury record has seen him miss 20 games across the past 2 seasons, with other games where he wasn't fit enough to play more than a handful of minutes at the end, meaning Tottenham will reportedly listen to any serious offer that come in for him this summer. Do we expect Richarlison to remain at Tottenham for next season?
I mean, Richarlison is saying, as you mentioned there, that he's not going anywhere. He's staying at Tottenham. And look, he would hold some of the cards, because if he's under contract, he doesn't have to go anywhere. A club can accept a deal and accepted agree a fee with another club. But if the player doesn't want to go, he's not going to go. Of course, he's going to have to think about it if Tottenham Hotspur agree a deal with somebody, because that's effectively saying you're not part of the plans here. So you're going to have to consider what you're going to do. I'm not going to be able to guarantee you first team football. We're moving in a different direction. There was interest from Saudi in January. There hasn't been that interest so far in this summer's transfer window, but I'm told if that interest from Saudi or anywhere else was to come back, and if the offer was a big one, then, as you mentioned before, Tottenham would have to seriously consider it, because this is a player, as you mentioned, the injury situation that he's had hasn't helped him at Tottenham, even though it was a pretty good season when he did play for Tottenham last season. I just wonder whether Tottenham are thinking about moving away from Richarlison and maybe bringing in another, as I mentioned before, versatile forward. Those two words seem to be the theme here today. And you think if they do bring in one or even two of these players, how much would that limit someone like Richarlison's game time? So it's something that Tottenham are going to have to think about, something Richarlison is going to have to think about. Of course, at this stage of the window and going into a transfer window, he doesn't need to say anything but, I'm staying at Tottenham, because it's not in his interest to say anything else but that. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with that. And him saying that as well, that would probably keep the value up as well. Because if you suddenly got a player who says he wants to leave, I don't know what that would do to the price, because a club can come in for someone like Richarlison and say, well, he wants to go, doesn't want to be there, doesn't want to play for you. We're not going to pay you that much, we'll pay you this. Whereas Tottenham can bide their time on this a little bit. There's quite a bit of time to go in this transfer window, and they can just say, we're going to wait, if we are going to sell Richarlison, that we get the right deal for him.
Yep. Listen, Dharmesh, can't thank you enough for that. Look, another player, Spurs, they've had tentative links to. Look, I appreciate it's a player that for many out there would love to see in a Spurs shirt. And I think, again, when you look at what he would command as a price tag, again, it's why we're intrigued to get your thoughts on it, Dharmesh. Look, he's a Newcastle player for now. There's no doubt about that. But Spurs have reportedly had an admiration in the forward of Alexander Isak of Newcastle. We do understand reports are suggesting that player is happy at the club. He's contracted there until 2028. I mean, look, Dharmesh, the question I probably want to ask you, just being bluntly, is there any remote chance that Alexander Isak gives up Newcastle United and Spurs put in what you'd have to believe to be a gigantic offer to not only prize Newcastle away into selling, but also the player to consider coming to Spurs? I mean, your take on any potential move for Isak?
I'm not surprised there's an interest in him. I mean, Tottenham won't be the only club that are interested in Alexander Isak. He's a fantastic player. But all of the information we were getting and the noises we were getting from Newcastle United were that before there's a whole June the 30th, and I keep talking about PSR, I know, but we did know that Newcastle United needed to sell before June the 30th. But what they wanted to avoid doing is selling their prized assets. They managed to get Joe Linton down to a new contract. And I think a lot of Newcastle fans were worried about two players in particular who would command the most amount of money. We're talking potentially 9 figures here in Alexander Isak and Bruno Guimaraes. And June the 30th has come and gone, and both of those players are still there. There's still talk about Anthony Gordon potentially leaving the club, but I don't think Newcastle now are in a position where they're under pressure to sell these players. I think they're confident that they are not in breach of any of the PSR rules. They made some money, which helped them towards PSR when they sorted out the compensation for Dan Ashworth to become sporting director at Manchester United. They sold, I think it was Elliot Anderson, and they got about £35 million for him. They got Minte, who hadn't kicked a ball for Newcastle, and got £33 million for him. So I think that has eased the burden on any potential worries that they might have had. Tottenham, of course, it's good from one perspective, even though it might not be realistic to think that they can get him, that they're interested in players like this, because that can only be a good sign for Tottenham fans and the direction that Tottenham and the hierarchy want to go. I can't see it happening. Look, I could be wrong, but I can't see that move happening simply because the contract situation that you mentioned before, and Newcastle not being under any pressure to sell, the feeling that he's happy at Newcastle, and the real strength that Newcastle have in not for sale, and we don't need to sell our big players anymore. So unfortunately, as much as you'd probably like to see him in a Tottenham shirt, I can't see it at the moment.
Santiago Jimenez is a name that's reportedly not on that list, despite scoring 23 times for Feyenoord last season under incoming Liverpool manager Arne Slot. He was pictured at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium towards the end of the season, but that was believed to be as the guest of an agent rather than the club. And in typical Last Word on Spurs fashion, Dharmesh, I'm going to throw a load of names at you, and just whatever you can catch is absolutely fine with us. Ivan Toney and Dominic Solanke, two Premier League strikers, have been linked. Joshua Zirkzee, who could be off to potentially Manchester United. Nico Williams maybe wanting to stay at Bilbao. Lois Openda is an interesting one. RB Leipzig record signing last season and scoring 24 goals in the Bundesliga. Victor Gyökeres and Jonathan David as well, as he comes towards the end of his Lille contract. Is there any truth in any of the links to these players, do you know?
The Zirkzee one, I think United are in talks with his representatives. They've said that they will meet that release clause of 40 million euros, around 34 million pounds. Unless that one breaks down, and then if Tottenham were interested, could they go in for him? Gyökeres is an interesting one, but he would be very, very expensive. He's only been at Sporting Lisbon for a season, and he's got, I think it's an 80 million pound release clause. Part of the reason for that was because whenever he does move, if and when he does move from Sporting Lisbon, Coventry had sorted out a particularly good sell-on for Gyökeres, hence why Sporting would want to maximize the amount of money they could get. And I mean, he's been absolutely fantastic for them. These are the kind of players that Tottenham will be looking at, of course. I did hear earlier on in the window that they were one of a number of clubs looking at Jonathan David's situation. It's kind of gone cold a little bit on that front. And I think Jonathan David he's at Copa America at the moment, I think with Canada. He's going to decide what he's going to do after the window closes. Significantly, though, the Lille president has said that he and Lenny Yoro, the central defender, will be allowed to leave in this transfer window. So once you make those kind of comments, the price won't necessarily be what you'd expect it to be had he been like 2 or 3 years left on his contract. We think it's probably going to be around 20 to 25 million pounds that will get Jonathan David. At the moment, it's not hot with Tottenham, but as I mentioned before, it is all of those names kind of fit into this versatile forward category that Tottenham Hotspur are looking at. Like I keep saying to you, look, we're what, when we record this, 4th of July.
Yeah.
This window is only starting to kick into gear now. We mentioned those Euros maybe halting things for a little while. I think we will see it starting to warm up now, and particularly in the last 2 weeks of July until the end of August, it will get pretty crazy, I think.
Dharmesh, one thing I wanted to quickly ask you, because I think we discussed this maybe previous window you were on, I think in January, that obviously Spurs, Ange actually came out in one of these pre-match presses and said that if he had the opportunity to sign a player of 100 million, he'd rather sign 2 players of 50 million. I just wonder, on that point there from Ange, when he says that kind of phrase like that, I mean, how much of that actually sticks in the market? Because again, we're talking about some players here that arguably, whilst their value might not be at 100 million, they could arguably see that interest driven up to 100 million. I just wonder, from you seeing and being part of so many transfer windows, how much that kind of comment from Ange really does stick in a market like this, where you do see prices rise all the time.
I mean, he's got a point, but I think it depends what club you're at as well, and what stage of your development you're at as well, because Tottenham Hotspur probably aren't in that position where they would want to spend 100 million, effectively be the majority of their budget on one player, when they need to build not just in one position. They need to build all over the pitch. So I'm not surprised that at this stage, Ange Postecoglou would be making those noises, in that if they had however many millions to spend, they would want to spread it around the pitch and really scout these players like they have been doing, and getting these players in like Archie Gray. I think that's the approach that Tottenham are going to take. I think if you fast forward a few years and say Tottenham Hotspur are really, really successful and they are winning league titles and trophies year in, year out, then it changes the dynamic slightly, because what then happens is the squad doesn't usually need revolution. It just needs evolution. Whereas I'm not saying Tottenham squad needs revolution just now, but there seems to be quite a number of changes that need to be made before Ange Postecoglou can sit back and say, this is entirely my squad. I've got everyone out that I don't think fits into my system, and I've got all these players in who are going to fit exactly into my system. That is going to take a little while. Once that is all in place and say they are successful, for example, like a Manchester City, or I'm not going to mention that team again, or a Liverpool or Manchester United back in the day, they might just make 1 or 2 signings in a summer transfer window as opposed to 5 or 6 because they don't need to change that much. But that 1 or 2 could be huge, big money statement signings that people will sit back and think, wow, this is incredible. Jack Grealish one summer, he goes to Manchester City, 100 million. That season when Liverpool got Virgil van Dijk and Alisson for a combined, whatever it was, 150 million.
Yep.
And Arsenal buying Declan Rice when they decided we need this player in this position, 105 million. Yep. I mean, the different case is Chelsea. Obviously, they were spending 100 million on Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo when there wasn't really that recent history of them winning all the time with a squad that they didn't need to change so much. But they decided to do it in a different way. I'm not saying it was the wrong way. It was a different way. They said, let's buy loads of players, long-term contracts, young profile, that kind of thing. Tottenham are doing it in their own way now as well.
Yeah, just hope you don't mind me asking you, Dharmesh. I want to ask you about Ivan Toney very quickly because there were some strong rumours and links to the player earlier in the window. They seem to have died off a little bit. Again, it's a player at the Euro, similar to Eze's position, where you feel nothing's going to really get concluded or sorted until obviously England's participation comes to an end, or obviously the Euros comes to an end and those players return to their respective clubs. I mean, Ivan Toney, a name there. You probably do expect him to leave Brentford this summer, not to put words in your mouth, but what kind of profile of club do you just see him going at, just out of interest, more and maybe an opinion piece rather than any expertise?
What I'd say about Ivan Toney as well is that Brentford are a little bit hamstrung because he's entering the final year of his contract. Yep. Now, the later in the window this goes, because Brentford, by all accounts, will not accept a penny less than 60 million. It was like 100 million back in January, and you can understand why they were quoting 100 million. They felt that to compensate for the loss of Ivan Toney and potentially going down and losing all of the Premier League money, they could compensate that by the amount of money they could get from Ivan Toney. Instead, they kept Ivan Toney because they felt with Ivan Toney in the team, they had a better chance of staying up. And with that, the riches that come with staying in the Premier League. This time, they've got that situation once again, whereby they might still have a decision to make, because if they don't get the money they want, one of 2 things will have to happen. It doesn't look like Ivan Toney is going to sign a new contract there, should I say. So he is eventually going to leave Brentford. Brentford were going to have to make a decision if they can't sell him early in the window for the price that they want, because the later in the window it goes, the price is going to come down, because opposing clubs will know this is your last chance. Why should we pay 60 million pounds for a player that we can speak to, if you're a foreign club, for nothing in January, in a matter of 3 or 4 months away? Or I can wait another 9 months and get him for no money at all next summer. But then Brentford will have that decision. Do they reduce the price and take what they can for Ivan Toney then? Or do they think, rather like they might have thought about in January, let's keep him. We've got a better chance of staying in the Premier League when Ivan Toney is there. And yes, we will lose money on him on a transfer fee. But if his goals next season keep us up and another season in the Premier League, that amount of money is going to far outweigh any kind of transfer fee that they would have got for him.
One last name we're going to throw at you, Dharmesh, and that is Pedro Neto of Wolves, reportedly again on one of the many players on Tottenham's shortlist. His injury record, naturally a real cause for concern, and myself and Ricky spoke about this on the show on Tuesday. He's missed almost 100 games in the last few seasons. There's little doubting his quality when he is available. He's racked up 3 goals and 11 assists across 24 appearances last season. Have you heard of any genuine interest there from Tottenham?
What I've heard is that there is tentative interest from a number of clubs in Pedro Neto, but significantly, there has been no formal contact or formal bids to Wolves for Pedro Neto. Add to that, I don't want to say this to remind you, but it seems that as it stands at the moment, I mean, this could change. If he was to move, it's likely he'd want to go to a club that's got Champions League football next season. So at the moment, that would rule Tottenham out, of course. That's not to say later on in the window, if Tottenham really pushed for him and they could agree a deal with Wolves and nobody else really came in for him, where he potentially would want to go for a Champions League experience next season, you can't rule it out. But I mean, you mentioned it there. I mean, if it hasn't been, if he could say injury free, every time I see him, what an incredible player. What a player.
Do you think that injury record's a concern, though, Dharmesh? From the outside looking in, I mean, Spurs are a club that, to be fair to them, I think it's fair to say, I'm sure Matt would agree, we've had our fair few share of players that have had a number of injuries in the past, and we just simply haven't been able to, for whatever reason, get to a point where we can facilitate getting players out there regularly with a number of injuries. I mean, is that a concern for clubs looking inside and outside of the player, where maybe, as you said, later in the window, that may change the stance in regards to the player himself?
I'm sure that every single club, when they do due diligence on a player, one of the things that they will look at is his appearance record and his injury record. And it's not the worrying thing that clubs will look at, and the big red flag maybe with Pedro Neto would be, these aren't like impact injuries. These aren't like, he's been tackled really badly, it's a badly twisted ankle, it's a twisted knee or whatever. These are like muscular injuries that seem to be recurring. So let's see if he can get through this pre-season and sort these injuries out, because there's an absolutely fantastic player in there that would improve any club in the Premier League, I'd say. Amen.
Dharmesh, the interrogation on transfers is over. We have two final questions to ask you. Matt's going to tee up the last one, which I know you love. But the one I want to ask you is, we touched earlier on in the show about progression and what it looks like for Spurs in the second season under Ange Postecoglou. Look, we discussed it with you earlier. It was a season last campaign of ups and downs and highs and lows. What do you think? Where do you feel Spurs will finish next season, given the fact, of course, Erik ten Hag is staying at Manchester United, and we've obviously got Chelsea in there of a new manager, Liverpool in there of a new manager, Arteta at Arsenal and just what he did there last season, and obviously Guardiola at City, maybe, dare I say, for his final season at the football club. Where can you see Spurs finishing next season?
What did I say last time?
I think, can I be honest?
Do you remember? Did I say top four?
I think you said top six. I think you said top six before.
I got it right then.
You got it right. You did get it right last time around.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm trying. We're going back 12 months here, Dharms. I'm thinking it was top six.
Where will Spurs finish? God, you're so bad. Watch these comments. Watch these comments now.
No pressure. There's nearly 5,000 that are watching this show.
Okay, I'm going to try and temper this a little bit. 6th and a trophy.
Okay, I love that. Listen, if that's true, can I just say,
that's a nice balance.
Can I just say, that was probably the longest we took Dharmesh to get an answer out of a question when he flew for all the transfer stuff. But then we've asked him a question about where Spurs will finish. That's the longest one. I think for some of our fans will be the same. Look, I think of all of us, I don't know if everyone agree. A lot of us are really craving a trophy. So look, Spurs, I don't know if you agree, Matt. If it was Europa League and it was top 6, you think majority would take that, Matty?
With a trophy?
A trophy? And
is
top
that
6? What do you reckon?
I'd take 17th in a trophy at this rate, to be completely honest. I said this before, Ricky. I started supporting Tottenham the week after the Carling Cup final win, is when one of my family members convinced me. So I haven't seen us win a trophy yet. I'd do anything for it, but yeah. Look, let's wait and see what happens. The final question, Dharmesh, and the one that every journalist hates as much as they love. Between now and the window closing, how many players, realistically, do you think Tottenham will sign permanently? No pressure.
3.
Ooh, that was quick.
Is that in addition to what they've got at the moment, Darms? Another 3?
Yeah, because they've only signed 3.
Okay.
It's an addition. Yeah, I'm not saying they're not going to sign any more.
I'm just going to clarify these things. I feel like I'm Judge Reed. I've got to clarify these things.
3 more, maybe 4.
Oh, okay. Added another one in there, Matty. He's added another one in there.
3 or 4.
Another one in. I love that. Dharmesh, you know how much we adore. We love having you on the show, mate. We can't thank you enough. I can't believe I'm actually saying this because I feel terrible even saying this, because how do people not know where to find you? But for those that don't know where to find you, Dharmesh, and the wonderful coverage you give, not just to football fans, but overall sport fans around the world. That's what Sky Sports News has become. Where can they find the wonderful work you do, Dams?
So Sky Sports News, channel 409 on your Sky Q box. The Transfer Talk podcast as well. We do that weekly, which is a fantastic listen, almost as good as Last Word on Spurs.
Well, I like that.
On X, I'm at Sky Sports _Sheth, and it's the same handle on Instagram. Thank you.
Love that.
Good plug.
Dharmesh, mate, it is always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for your time. We do a project, can I just say, for someone that, this time of the year, January in the summer, we know is your most busiest time. So we can't thank you enough as always for finding the time for Last Word on Spurs, mate. Because I know it's a busy.
Don't worry, mate. I've got Love Island on record, so it's all good.
Likewise. See, look at Matt's face has dropped.
I own it. I watch it. Why not?
See, there you go.
Ricky does too. I rate it. Yeah.
That's a man after my own heart. If I thought I loved Dharmesh more before, this show is now just transcended into the ultimate loving. Right, what we are going to do, we're going to let Matt go. Dharmesh is going to come round to my house. We're going to watch it on ITV. We're not having Dharmesh more doing the Love Island pod, so we're having Last Word on Spurs. Honestly, mate.
I'd do one of them, pleasure.
Yeah. I love that. Fantastic. Matt, I'm sure you agree. We love Dharmesh up on Last Word on Spurs, right? Always a pleasure.
I don't agree that we love Love Island, but I do agree that we love Dharmesh. All is incredible insight, and I think the best thing about these shows that we get to do with the incredible journalists is we get the behind the scenes, and we learn little things about the structures of transfers and negotiations that we didn't know before, which helps us understand a little bit more why things might take a bit longer than we want sometimes. But it's been a fantastic show, and Dharmesh, for myself as well, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Pleasure, and enjoyed it.
Guys, got to say, look, been over 4.5, nearly 5,000 of you watching us live. Thank you so much for all your incredible support for the show. I feel after this one, there's going to be as much growth in Love Island as in the transfer market for Last Word on Spurs. We shall see. From myself, from wonderful Matty Hayes, from my ever-lesson friend over there, my Love Island colleague, the wonderful Dharmesh Sheth. Please go and check him out, the wonderful Dharmesh Sheth. It's been a pleasure from us all here. Keep safe, keep well. We're back before you know it. And as always, come on, you Spurs.